everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I have to do a little bit of a pivot this week. The original plan was to have my buddy John, frequent co-host, my friend John, on the show. We were going to discuss one of our favorite movies, one of my dad's favorite movies, The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas, an old Hammer film starring Peter Cushing. And John has been a little under the weather and just not feeling great today. And he's getting some medical stuff done. So everybody just keep John in your thoughts, and hopefully we can get him back on the show next week. So I had to do a quick pivot here and had an idea in mind. I always have stuff in the back of my mind just in case things don't go according to plan, which my life has kind of been like that the past year and a half. Things don't always go to plan. So I always kind of try to keep a show on the back burner there that I can pull from. And this one was actually sort of suggested by John. So he's not on the show this week, but this is sort of inspired by him. We were talking about stats for the show a few weeks ago, and not something I pay too much attention to. I mean, I do look at them occasionally just to see which episodes are performing better and which ones need a little bump and which topics seem to work better. And we had noticed that on Apple Podcasts, the most of our listeners are from Seattle, which awesome. Thank you everybody in Seattle who's listening. Seattle, Washington. A little surprising to me because I'm from New York, and I feel like a lot of the shows I've done have been East Coast centered. I've done a lot of things on Gettysburg and Staten Island and New York City, Connecticut, New Jersey. So I'm doing a lot of this like Northeast focused shows, and but we talk a lot about a Bigfoot and Washington, Pacific Northwest. Washington has tons of Bigfoot sightings. So for my listeners in Seattle, I thought this week we would talk about some Bigfoot sightings in Kings County, where Seattle is located. So before we get to the stories, though, I just wanted to give a few shout outs to certain people. My buddy Andy at Spooky Island Radio, we were catching up earlier today. He was on episode 66. We did a show on missing 411 and Bigfoot and ghost stories. And Andy's awesome. Spooky Island Radio, great show. I listen religiously to his podcast. And we just haven't really talked in a while, and not due to any particular reason. We just, both busy, living our lives, work. And I know he was moving, and just personal lives get in the way. And we just haven't really had a chance to talk. The holidays were all in there. So it was good just catching up with him earlier today. I also got an email from my friend Courtney Maroc from Haunt John's. She's been on the show a few times. I will link to all these shows down in the description below so you guys can find them. But Courtney's been on the show a few times. I've been on her show. So it was really good catching up with Courtney this morning as well over email. And I missed her again. It's just, time goes by and like, oh, I got to email her. And then before you know it, it's like 2 months later. So guys, I'm sorry that we've kind of not talked more frequently, but I'm glad we caught up this morning, and hope to have both of you guys on my show again. I know Andy and I are talking about me being on Spooky Island Radio probably sometime in March. He's looking at his schedule, but he wanted me to be on the show. We were trying to do like a show in December around Christmas time, and that just never materialized. Again, we've both just been crazy busy, and schedules just don't mesh all the time as much as we would like them to. So just wanted to say hello to both of you guys if you're listening. And thank you for your support and your help. And again, I'm always here to help and support you guys and give you shout outs. And so yeah, go check out Haunt John's, go check out Spooky Island Radio if you like ghosts. And Andy does a lot of missing 411 stuff too. I mean, Courtney does a lot of paranormal, supernatural ghost stories and hauntings, obviously Haunt John's. Andy does ghost stories, but he also does a lot of the missing 411 stuff, which I love. I love missing 411 phenomena. So I've done a couple of episodes of my own on that, and when Andy was on, we talked missing 411. So thank you guys, and great catching up with you. Also wanted to give a shout out to one of our fans on Instagram, Boo Trout, and I will link to them below. I always love hearing from the fans. I always love hearing from people who are like not related to me, like my mom or dad or my son, saying, "Oh, I like your show." So it's great to know that I'm reaching a wider audience. I love hearing back from you guys. I love knowing that you're watching the show or listening to the show and enjoying it. And I've been having a lot of discussions and dialogue with people on YouTube comments, on Instagram, and it's just great. Even when we don't agree, it's great to just have that respectful dialogue and share ideas and share thoughts. And that's kind of really what I wanted to do with this show, is just get things out there and talk about things, not convince anybody of anything, not say this is definitely Bigfoot or this is definitely a ghost. Just let's talk. Let's figure out the truth together. So that's where we're at. So, Boo Trout, thank you for following. Thanks for your comments yesterday on Instagram, and it was good talking to you. And hope you're enjoying the show. So, yeah. So let us move on to Seattle Bigfoot stories. So, a quick disclaimer before I get to the stories, I just want to say I get most of these stories from the BFRO database, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And I've got some comments from people from prior episodes where I've done this and read things off the BFRO. There is some controversy with the BFRO. I fully admit that from the very first episode I did using their database, and I know people have very strong feelings about the BFRO, either positively or negatively. I just like the stories. I'm not here to promote the BFRO. I'm not here to endorse them. I just like reading their stories and reading the analysis. I know we've had some commenters say that they've submitted stories and they've been ignored, while other more sensational stories get on there. But I've also had people who've submitted stories and they were treated nicely. So I guess your mileage may vary. It may depend on the state. It might depend on the investigators in your area. I don't know. Again, I'm not endorsing the BFRO. There's a lot of gray area there, we'll say, where, again, I've heard good things, I've heard bad things, and I've heard neutral things. So this is not an endorsement. I'm just using the stories that witnesses have posted to their site and what the investigators have said after they've sort of spoken to the witnesses and what their analysis was. So just wanted to get that out of the way. Not an endorsement. I do like the website. Again, just like I liked Finding Bigfoot, I liked the town halls. I liked hearing the witness stories. I didn't really like when Matt and Bobo and Cliff and Renee would do their silliness afterwards, because it usually was. It was, let's shoot fireworks and let's get Girl Scouts to sing folk songs and weird stuff. And again, I understand it to a degree, but most of it is just for ratings, for television stunts, and to make it sensational. To me, every week you got to kind of do something different and do something to top last week. So I didn't really like that about that show. But the town halls I loved because it was just local people telling their stories, and some of them were a little wacky, but most of them were, really interesting stories, and most of the people seemed sincere. So that's what I liked about it. And the same thing with the BFRO. I'm not endorsing them. I've had dealings with them that I didn't quite like, and I'm not going to get into that. But it's not an endorsement. I'm just taking the witness stories, and we can talk about them. And that for me is just really interesting because it's not sensationalized for TV. It's just somebody telling their story. So there's your disclaimer. Let's move on to the stories. Okay, so King County has like 47 reports in the BFRO database. So I'm not, I had to whittle them down. So I'm just going to start from the most recent ones. And I'm also only going to do Class A's, which this is Class A is like where the witness claims to have seen the Bigfoot. You have Class B's and C's, which are more like hearing howls or hearing something in the woods or finding footprints. It's not the direct witness to a Bigfoot. It's just hearing things. Not that those are not great stories, because they can be. And I will do more Seattle episodes or King County episodes in the future. But for this one, I just wanted to pick some Class A's, and I'm going from the most recent backwards. So just wanted to put that out there as well. There's many more to choose from in here. And just to put it out there again, I am not really familiar with the King County area or Seattle or the West Coast, Pacific Northwest. I mean, I think the furthest west I've ever been in this country has been Baton Rouge. And we actually passed by Honey Island Swamp, and there's the legend of the Honey Island Swamp Monster down there, a Bigfoot swamp monster sort of creature. Didn't really get to investigate much. I mean, we kind of got out of the car real briefly and took a few steps into the woods, the swamp down there. But very cool for me because I've read about it since I was a kid. But I've never been to the West Coast. I've never been to this region, so I'm a little bit less familiar with uh, these locations and the geography out there as I am with, like, say, Connecticut or New Jersey or New York, obviously. So if I make any mistakes here, just forgive me. Um, but let's get to the first story. So this one, man sees large hair-covered figure while riding on train near the Cascade Tunnel. This one reminded me of that story recently. Believe it was Colorado, where somebody was like filming a Bigfoot from a train, and it turned out to be like a publicity stunt. Some guy dressed in a costume, and it worked. You know, everybody was talking about it. But yeah, let's talk about this one. So this one is from Tuesday, August 4th, year 2009, in King County. Location details: within a mile west of the west side of the Cascade Tunnel. Just after the sighting, I viewed a sharp drop in the terrain to reveal a river below that was full of boulders and had whitewater rapids. The nearest town, it's within a mile of the west opening to the Cascade Tunnel. Nearest road, probably Highway 2. They were on the train. So observed. My wife and I just returned from a trip out to Seattle via Amtrak. We took the Empire Builder out of Chicago all the way to Seattle. On the morning of Tuesday, August 4th, around 8 a.m., I was sitting in our sleeper compartment on the port side of the train as it exited the long Cascade Tunnel. I was just relaxing with my head back against the seat, looking out the window, letting the scenery pass by. The train was moving about 40 miles per hour, and the landscape rose sharply up the mountain. I was facing towards the rear of the train. About a mile west of the tunnel exit, I suddenly glimpsed a huge figure standing in the trees, up the grade about 50 to 75 feet from the train. The woods were quite dense, and I only saw the figure for a brief moment, but it was unmistakably a Bigfoot. It, was standing on the sharp incline, looking down at the train with his right hand on the aspen tree. Because of the speed of the train, I only glimpsed it, but I'm positive of what I saw. The area seemed to be very remote, desolate, and wild. A minute or two later, the landscape dropped off into a steep canyon where I could view the Skokomish River below. It looked to be full of large boulders, and the flow was quite rapid and steep. The Empire Builder passes this same spot daily. It occurs to me that this animal might have developed some curiosity with the train and may visit the spot quite often. It was quite a shock to glimpse him, quite a thrill as well. Of course, I exclaimed to my wife immediately. There was no chance she could see it because of her position and the speed of the train. I have reluctantly told my family and a few close friends of the sighting. They are understandably skeptical. Also noticed, the figure I saw was very large, perhaps 8 or 9 feet tall. I could see no details of its features, but it moved its head to the left as if it was observing the passing train. Other witnesses. My wife was seated across from me looking toward the front of the moving train. I was looking toward the rear. Other stories. Since my sighting and returning home, I've read several accounts on the internet. Brought me to your website. Time was around 8 a.m., sunny and clear. The environment was a steep, inclining, forested mountainside, very remote. So let's do... I'm going to read the follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Tyler Bounds. So he says, I spoke with the witness on August 11th, 2009 for over an hour, so this is just a few days later. I found him to be very relaxed, friendly, and matter-of-fact about his sighting. He had some additional details to add to his report. He noticed the figure on a steep hillside above the train. Its right hand was on a tree that was approximately 8 to 10 inches in diameter, in deep cover with small, younger trees in front of and below it. At first, he thought it was stationary, perhaps a cardboard cutout, when he noticed that its head was moving from side to side, as if it was watching the train go by. He saw the figure from head to toe. It was covered in black hair and appeared to be very, very muscular. He estimated its weight to be 400 pounds. He did not notice any details of facial features. Its right elbow was bent and its left arm was dangling at its side. The witness, who was a hunter, only observed it for about 2 seconds but knew what it was immediately. The area is remote and undeveloped and very rugged with lots of second-growth deciduous and coniferous trees, in addition to several creeks at an elevation of 2,000 feet. I went to the area of the site 1 week after speaking to the witness and walked 1.5 miles of railroad track in an attempt to pinpoint the exact location of the sighting. The tracks parallel US 2 and intersect with a power line right-of-way. The Deception Creek trailhead is also in the immediate area of the sighting. So this one... I have some thoughts on this one. On the one hand, you have a witness who's seeing a fleeting glimpse of something. He's on a train, they're moving pretty quickly. He's seeing something at the wood line, probably like right at the edge of the woods, looking at a train. He says he only saw it for a couple of seconds, but he says he sees it, look, it's holding a tree, it's upright. So on the one hand, he has this clear glimpse of something, uh, but it's a remote area. He's moving fast. He doesn't see it for a long time. It's not like he stared at it for minutes on end. This is just a couple of seconds. So could it have been a trick of the eye? Of course. On the other hand, he's a hunter. So he may just have a really good eye for seeing these things out there and saw what he saw. So interesting to me. Not sure what to make of it. Again, it reminds me of that story in Colorado where there's just a Bigfoot out in the open walking around. But this one he says was like right by the tree line. So this could be just a curious Bigfoot that knows the train is coming and just kind of wants to get a look and is at the edge of the tree, the tree line without coming out and just wants to get a peek at the train and see what is going on. So let's move on to the second story. All right, story number 2. Teen views ape-like animal crossing road quadrupedally at night in Enumclaw. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. So this is January of 2008, so winter. Again, King County. Nearest town, Enumclaw. Nearest road, 295th and 416th. Again, I don't know what those are. I'm guessing those are roads or highways. So observed. I was driving down a gravel road late at night, and this big black thing ran across the road. I instantly got chills, especially because it looked at me while darting across the road. It had a face I will never forget. It did not run on 2 legs, however, more like on feet and hands, not knees and hands, feet and hands. Behind my house, I always hear what sounds like hammering and screaming late at night in the woods. Other witnesses, just me. Time and conditions. The visual incident was in the winter. It was a clear night, probably 11 p.m., and it was right in my headlights, very close. The hammering and screaming is all year round, every night. The environment is trees and hiking trails. So, short story, and I'll give my thoughts on that in a second, but I want to do the follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Chris Gonzalez. Witness was approximately 17 years old at the time of her sighting and is now 21. She seemed intelligent and sincere during our conversation on December 19th. Witness was delivering newspapers in her vehicle at around 12 midnight. She saw a huge black creature walk on all fours out onto the road. The creature stopped for about 1 to 2 seconds in the middle and stared at her. She described the animal as having black, medium-length hair. The eyes were shining yellow in her headlights. She could only describe the face as ape-like and hairless. She described the body type as large as an adult cow but in human form. It then walked quickly into the bush and was not seen again. The witness quickly drove away. The witness has also heard strange screams and what sounds like hammering in the woods behind her father's house over the years that she lived with him in Enumclaw. She has also heard what she describes as someone walking on the gravel driveway late at night. Her father always told her that it was just the usual wildlife and that everything was all right. The road crossing incident was within 20 miles of her father's house. The road crossing incident occurred very near Flaming Geyser State Park and Black Diamond State Park. The terrain is very well suited for a large amount of wild animals and plenty of food and shelter. It is my opinion that based on the description given by the witness and the location of the incident, that she did see a Bigfoot creature and not a bear, cow, or human in a costume. So this one, yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, obviously she's talking about screaming and hammering, which sounds to me like tree knocks. So that's interesting. She says it crossed the road on all fours. So 2 things here. The road crossing, my buddy Scott and I, we've been talking about the road crossings from very early on in this show's history. I think starting with episode 4 or 5. We did an episode where we discussed road crossings in detail and why these creatures seem to dart out in front of oncoming cars. If these are supposed to be somewhat intelligent primates, why do they seem to run out in front of cars so often and get caught in the headlights when they can just wait 2 seconds, let the car go by, and then cross, and nobody would ever see them? So it just makes you wonder. The walking on all fours, we hear this a lot with Bigfoot. It's not the usual. I mean, most people see something upright, but people have talked about these things going down on all fours. And she says it was more on its feet and hands, not hands and knees. So not crawling like a baby, but running on all fours. So yeah, I mean, my first thought here was bear. She's 17. She's out at night. It's dark. It could be a case of mistaken identity. She says it was big like a cow, so maybe a grizzly bear. But the face, she says the face was very ape-like. Um, and she said that the body type was larger than an adult cow, but in human form. So she's sort of saying that the body uh, had human form, arms and legs, and not just four legs. Um, I think the other things are interesting too. She hears someone walking on the gravel driveway late at night. Uh, Bipedal walking does sound different than quadrupeds walking. Uh, so they don't really go into that. I mean, she says this thing she saw was on all fours. So I'm not sure if the gravel footsteps she heard were bipedal or quadruped. Um, but it definitely sounds like there's a history, something going on here. Uh, Again, clear night. She sees this. The face that's what kind of gets me. And again, people who live not in big cities are very familiar with bears. They know what a bear looks like. Um, she's saying it wasn't a bear. I can kind of go either way on this one because she was young. Not that 17-year-olds don't make good witnesses, but she's out late. It's dark. She could have been a little scared. Maybe this thing just, could have been mangy, a mangy bear, just or a deformed bear. I don't know. Don't know what to make of it, but interesting that it walked on all fours instead of just upright. So let us move on. Story number 3, late night sighting near Duval. So this happened June 23rd, 2005, again, King County, Washington. Location details. It was directly in front of a large wetland that was located in what I would consider heavily forested area. Anyone who lives in Duval knows what I mean. It was probably 5 or 6 miles down Paradise Lake Road. It might have been Duval Road, though. I'm not exactly sure. Nearest town is Duval. Nearest road, Paradise Lake Road, he thinks. So observed. This sighting took place back when I lived in Washington last year. I was sitting on my windowsill at 11 p.m. at night. I lived next to a large wetland/swamp area. My backyard was a large hill in front of the wetland. I was sitting on my windowsill and saw a large figure come out of the wetlands, walk down the hill, and then re-enter the wetland at the bottom of the hill. The figure was probably 7 feet tall. I doubt it was 8 or 9, dark in color and very large in build. Also noticed, I lived there since I was 8 to 9 years old, and I'd never noticed anything before. I had ventured into this wetland before, but not too far in. Other witnesses. I was alone. The rest of the family was sleeping. Other stories. I have read many reports off this site that took place near the area. So yeah, there's like 47 others, 46 other stories from King County. Time and conditions. It was night, but there was moonlight. The figure stood out well against a green plant backdrop. The environment, heavy forest wetland. So let's read the follow-up, and then we'll talk about this one. So this follow-up was done by investigator John G. Callender. He says, I spoke with the witness on the phone. His house was in a cul-de-sac and surrounded by wetlands and woods. He said it was hot in the house, so to cool down, he opened the window and sat in the sill, which was about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. As he was looking around the backyard, he saw it walking. He described his backyard as having a flat area next to a big hill with a dense grove of trees on top. It was out of this grove that the figure emerged. It had a really massive build. It started walking down the hill to the base of the hill, across the flat part, and then walked into the swamp. He doesn't believe the animal ever saw him because it seemed pretty focused on wherever it was going. It was looking straight ahead. He described the animal's walk as lumbering, but not quite as ape-like as the Patterson film. I'll return to this in a second. He said the entire time he observed the animal, it was on 2 feet and that it never dropped down on all fours. He said he wasn't able to see any features, but that he could see the build fairly well due to the moonlight. He said it crunched twigs and sticks under its feet as it walked. I asked if it appeared to be trying to sneak around the yard. He said it seemed pretty set on where it was going, as it walked into his backyard and then into the swampy area. At no time did it ever stop to look around. He found some depressions in the backyard the following day, but nothing that he would call a clear footprint. I asked the witness if he has ever heard any unusual sounds near his home, and he said that he hadn't. So I like this story. This one sounds more, there are some things here that I like. Um, One, he seems to have a good view of it, and he's not making up details. He's not saying he saw the face or he saw the teeth. I mean, this thing was it was at night. It was at a somewhat of a distance. He's saying about 7 feet tall, not 8 or 9 or 10 or 14 feet. It's kind of a reasonable height for a Bigfoot. Uh, he's also saying that he lived there for years and never experienced anything else. He's not saying that he saw these creatures tons of times. Uh, Bulky though, he's saying this was a really massive build. Last week's episode, Scott and I, my buddy Scott Perry, we were talking about different types of Bigfoot and how they seem to be different in different parts of the country and the world. We kind of focused on North America for our episode. But yeah, in the Pacific Northwest, these creatures seem to be much bigger built, thicker, muscular, uh, and lumbering. And I think it's interesting that he says the animals walk. He described it as lumbering, but not quite as ape-like as the Patterson film. So maybe a similar creature, lumbering. Um, Clearly not a person. In his backyard. He's saying the creature didn't even look at him. It just was kind of doing its thing. It's kind of going from point A to point B as quickly as it could, as efficiently as it could. He heard twigs breaking. So, and again, when you're out in the wilderness at night, you can hear a pin drop. It is very quiet. So for anybody who's listening who is in the city, um, the two most startling things to me about being like in the true backcountry, the true wilderness, is how quiet it can be and how dark it can be. You have not seen darkness like that or experienced quiet like that until you are like really in the wilderness. So if there's something moving, you will hear it very well. Um, so this one I think is a really interesting story. He didn't find footprints. He found some depressions in the yard. Um, and he says, he has not heard any unusual sounds. So this seems like a very isolated encounter. He just was out one night. It was hot. He's sitting on his windowsill, wants to cool off, and sees this thing kind of walking through his yard. So creepy story, but I like this one. Again, I'm not saying it was definitely Bigfoot, but does not seem to be a misidentification of a bear. I mean, maybe a hunter, maybe a guy in a ghillie suit, possibly. I don't know why a guy would be out in a ghillie suit on a hot night in the dark, walking through the woods. It's a very easy way to get shot. So I like this one. Okay, story number 4. This is another one from near Enumclaw. Woman tells of daylight sighting while hiking near Mud Mountain Dam. So this was in July of 2002. Again, King County. Location details, Mud Mountain Dam area. Nearest town is Enumclaw. Again, I hope I'm saying that right. Enumclaw. Nearest road is Mud Mountain Road. So observed. Me and my friend were going back on a service road at Mud Mountain Dam in Washington State near Enumclaw, Washington on Mud Mountain Road. We walk down the road and it slopes down and to the right. On the right is a hillside that goes straight up, and to the left was a hillside that goes down, and at the bottom is a circular area that is dry and wetlands. I looked to my left as I neared the curve in the road, and what I believed to be a Bigfoot was crouched down, getting water from the swampy area. It then snapped its head over really quick, looked at us, and then stood up. It had to have been around 8 feet tall. It was brown-red in color, darker than a mountain lion. I ran as fast as I could back to my car. I looked back, and my friend had seen it, and he was right behind me. I've been back many times, and I've never seen anything again, but I will never, ever forget what I saw. I am reporting this so many years later because my friend recently saw something a few miles up 410 near Scatter Creek, and I know there is something in that area. Other witnesses, yes, one other person other than myself. Other stories. Yes, my friend saw a large shadow on the side of 410 near Scatter Creek on the other side of the guardrail. He was driving and just saw it. It was large. Time and conditions, sun filtered through the forest, so daytime environment, forest and wetlands. So let us look at the follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Soren Walsh. And they say, I spoke with the witness at length and found her able to recall the encounter with great clarity. The witness was able to provide some additional details to her encounter. As she came around the bend with her friend, they both noticed the animal squatting down and using its hand to drink water from the stream, approximately 100 feet away. Once the animal heard them, it looked up and turned its head and shoulders towards them in a startled manner. The animal immediately stood up on two legs and froze while keeping constant eye contact with the witnesses. The witness recalled the animal having reddish-brown hair covering its entire body, approximately 4 to 6 inches long. The animal stood approximately 7.5 feet tall and had very large, dark eyes. The witness and her friend said they looked at the animal for 10 to 15 seconds, not believing what they were seeing. The witness recalled the arms of the animal hanging down below its knees as it stood there looking back at them. Upon realizing what they were looking at, they turned and ran back up the road towards their car. The witness recalled hearing branches breaking as the animal made its way back into the woods. The witness provided the name of the individual that was with her that afternoon. He is still living in the area, and I was given possible contact information. I was not able to contact him. If he contacts me, I will update this report. I was able to meet with the witness. She was able to take me to the exact location of her sighting. In addition to fresh running water, the area has great numbers of salmon berries, huckleberries, blueberries, and blackberries. So this is another story I really like. It's a daylight sighting, daytime, clear. Uh, there's another witness with her. And this one, again, it's harder for me to dismiss this as a misidentification. To see something running across a dark road at night on all fours, you have to consider that maybe it's a bear. This, they're seeing a humanoid figure, a hairy human-ish figure squatting and scooping water up into its mouth with its hands. I mean, a bear doesn't drink like that. A bear is going to just put its snout in the water and drink like a dog or like any other animal. But this thing is using its hand to cup water to its mouth. So that to me is very interesting. And then when it stands up, 7.5, 8 feet tall, brown and red color, and just stares at them. And it sounds like this thing, once the animal heard them, it looked up and turned its head and shoulders toward them in a startled manner. So it sounds like all three of them were kind of surprised to kind of bump into each other. And you hear that a lot in these Bigfoot stories, that these creatures don't want to be seen. They're just kind of caught off guard for whatever reason. Again, you'd think they would be a little bit more cognizant of their surroundings and what's approaching, but sometimes, we all get caught off guard sometimes. And it sounds like they stumbled upon this creature. It was thirsty. It's drinking, and then it looks up and sees them, and it stands up, and it's startled. They're startled. They run away, and the Bigfoot kind of turns around and walks away. And they said they hear the branches moving and snapping as it walked away. It would have been really cool if they could have gotten the other witnesses' testimony here and gotten their story. But again, this sounds like a large creature, 7.5, 8 foot tall, reddish brown hair. This sounds like the standard, patty type Sasquatch from the Pacific Northwest. Tall, dark hair, reddish. So very interesting. I like this story too. Again, it's a clear daytime sighting. There's really no mistaking this. There's really no just explaining this away as, oh, you saw a bear, you saw a deer. I mean, this thing was scooping water into its mouth. So very interesting. Love this story. Let me know what you guys think. Okay, story number 5. This one's a little bit longer, so bear with me here. This is from August of 2000, so summertime in King County. Location details. As you drive up to the lake, this one is multiple witness sighting at Rattlesnake Lake. Should have said that first. As you drive up to the lake, there was a clearing that was surrounded by a wooded area on two sides of the clearing. It might be parking now or part of a bike trail. Nearest town is North Bend. Nearest road is 436th Avenue Southeast, Cedar Falls Road. Observed. In the summer of 2000, I took a friend up to Rattlesnake Lake in North Bend, Washington. It was a clear night, full moon, which makes for a breathtaking view of Rattlesnake Ridge. This was before all the development was done, so we pulled his truck into a clearing to the left of the main road as you come up on the lake. We parked and climbed into the bed of the truck. I would say 15 minutes later, we heard a rustle in the bushes. When we turned to look, there was a very large animal of some sort. It was taller than the average black bear and stood like a man. We literally sat there frozen for a good 2 minutes. It would turn to the left and walk 3 or 4 large steps, stop and face our direction. A few seconds later, it would do the same to the right. I would say it was a good 40 yards from us and a good 15 yards from the tree line. It stood 7+ feet tall, long arms covered in what seemed to be dark hair, and walked like a human as it paced. It was dark and too far away to see its face. Finally, my friend slowly grabbed my arm and asked me what the hell that was. I replied that I had no idea, but it is freaking huge. We both jumped out of the bed of the truck, throwing his spare tire on top of our blankets, and made a mad dash for the cab. As he drove away, I watched out the back window and it just stood there. To this day, I wish he had turned a full circle and shined his lights on it so we could have gotten a better look. I grew up in the Snoqualmie, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Snoqualmie, North Bend area and spent many summer nights and days at that lake and in the woods. My friend was a hunter and in the military. There was no way it was an animal from this area. I didn't tell anyone about this for years, and when I finally did, they all laughed at me like I was a nutcase. But I know what I saw, and I know the fear that I felt, that paralyzing fear and dread. Also noticed, it didn't make any sounds that we heard, just the rustling of the bushes as it entered the clearing. But it was definitely observing us and didn't seem to be bothered by us at all. Other witnesses, two including myself, so it's just the two of them, we were talking while looking at the stars and the ridge. Other stories, not until reading some of these today on the BFRO website. I finally don't feel crazy. All these years I've doubted what we saw. Time and conditions around midnight, clear night, bright full moon. Environment, as said above, it was a clearing that was surrounded by woods on two sides. There were large boulders bordering the clearing along the road. Cool story, and we'll get back to this. I'm going to do the follow-up investigation first by BFRO investigator Dave Illig. He says, I spoke with the witness in great detail regarding her encounter. Although she didn't observe the creature emerge from the tree line, she did notice it pacing back and forth several times. She found it particularly interesting how it walked in a very casual and relaxed manner, yet still left her and her friend with a very unsettling feeling. The witness does recall one particular feature regarding the head of the creature. She remembers specifically that there were no ears present as one would see on a bear. She said the head was more round in shape. After departing the area and trying to understand exactly what it was they had just witnessed, she did regret not directing the vehicle's headlights toward the creature for a better look. Her friend made no attempt to linger around any longer than necessary, and upon departing, turned the vehicle away from the creature, making a complete U-turn, and departed the same way he entered. So this one is very cool, and it just reminds me of, Scott had mentioned a story last week about these 4 law enforcement guys who are out hunting, and it was the end of the day. They're sitting around their campfire at night, and a Bigfoot creature kind of emerges from the woods, just so the firelight is kind of hitting it, and it was watching them and kind of like rubbing its thumbs together, like it was kind of like, what am I going to do here? Like, I got these 4 guys. So this one, to hear that this creature sort of comes out and is pacing, it's clearly looking at these two, and again, it's very hard to dismiss this as a bear or anything else. It's too big to be a person, a little weird to be a person. I mean, I don't know if I would approach a truck, at night in a ghillie suit. You're going to get shot. And it's clearly not a bear. A bear is not going to stand up and, pace back and forth while sort of sizing up the people in the truck. But this thing seems like it was thinking, it was pacing. They get in the truck, they drive away from the truck, and this thing is still like just watching them drive away. So very creepy. And yeah, it just reminded me of that story that Scott told last week about the Bigfoot that was like moving it, fiddling with its thumbs, just like contemplating, what am I going to do here? So this is creepy. And the person she was with was a hunter and in the military. This is not the type of person who's going to easily get scared by a bear who just bumbled out of the woods, or a person. I mean, clearly they saw something they did not understand, that didn't make sense, that they couldn't recognize, they couldn't identify, and they got the hell out of there. They didn't want to get a closer look. They just wanted to get away. So very cool story. And again, you hear this a lot. I mean, she mentions how she didn't tell anyone for years. And then when she did tell people, they just laughed at her. It just makes you wonder how many people are seeing these things that don't ever tell anybody, because they're afraid of ridicule. They're afraid they're not going to be believed. And I've said on the show many times, we don't have to believe that what they saw was Bigfoot, but I think to ridicule someone is just wrong. You can question it. Again, question everything. That's my motto now. Question everything. Uh, but don't make fun of people. Don't laugh at people. Don't just dismiss them. If they saw something that freaked them out, they saw something, and maybe it was a bear. Maybe it was like some weird guy in a ghillie suit, who was 7 feet tall and wearing a ghillie suit and just popped out at night and didn't care if these people had a shotgun with them. Uh, it could be, anything is possible. But I just think it's sad that people who have these encounters that really frighten them, and it doesn't have to just be Bigfoot. It could be ghosts. It could be UFOs. Again, question it. You can question the witness. You can try to offer rational explanations, but to mock people, to just dismiss them outright as being crazy, I think is cruel. And I think it prevents us from really getting to the truth of what these things are. Again, not saying that it's definitely Bigfoot, but why are people seeing hairy, human-like, creatures in the woods, these hairy primates in the woods of North America? It doesn't make sense. And whether it's a psychological phenomenon, or whether it's a cultural phenomenon, whatever it is, I think it's worth studying. So I feel bad for this witness for just, and again, one of the earlier stories, they mentioned that as well, that they didn't tell anybody. And when they did, or like fear of ridicule. So very sad to hear that, but I'm glad she posted it here, because I do think this is an intriguing story. I think the pacing of this animal or this creature, whatever, is really interesting. It's not just standing there looking at them, it's pacing. And to me, that's telling me that it's thinking, it's contemplating, what do I do here? Maybe it was an intimidation tactic, maybe it was thinking. Either way, it just seems a little intelligent, a little more intelligent than a bear. So very cool story. I really like this one. Okay, so last story for this episode. I'm gonna keep it to just these 6 stories for this one, and I will revisit this because there's so many stories here in Seattle, and I'm really digging these. So, vocalization followed by sighting near Carnation, Fall City. So this is in June of 1999, so summer in King County. Location details. It was somewhere near Carnation and Fall City. There was a water treatment plant or reservoir. Nearest town is Carnation, Fall City. Nearest road, can't remember. It was near a reservoir. So observed. 3 coworkers and I were putting up communication lines on telephone poles in a bucket truck. We heard high-pitched sounds, almost like an ape, so I started to mimic the sounds. Big mistake. Just then, my coworker asked me what kind of sound that was that I was making. Then, as he was up in the bucket, he said a man crossed the road. I thought he was just fooling around. As we hung more interduct, I noticed a large hairy animal which crossed the road. At first, I did not think anything of it, but this thing kept walking back and forth out to the middle of the road looking at me. I had my hand over my eyebrows trying to get a better look and to cut the glare off from the sun. This animal was not walking with a limp or bent over. To me, it walked straight up and down like a man. It was looking at me as if I had puzzled it with my impersonation. I would say it was a good 70 yards away. I tried to reason it to be a man, but all the men working in the area had hard hats on with reflective vests, us also. This thing was walking back and forth like you see a wild animal in the zoo. It did pause several times in the middle of the road to look at me, as if it had some kind of intelligence. For some reason, I felt it was female. The arms were long and hung at the animal's side. The hips were wider than the shoulders. Also noticed, when we arrived at about 10 a.m., we heard a high-pitched yell, and I asked, what was that? It sounded like it was very close to us. Other witnesses, 3 coworkers, also heard the sounds. No other stories that he's aware of. He says it was about 3 p.m., sunny, very dry. The environment, one road in and out, pine trees and brush on both sides of the road, and I think there were swamps around, kind of isolated. So this one's really interesting, and I'm going to go back to it, but I'm going to read the follow-up investigation. It doesn't say who did it, so I can't give them credit, but the follow-up investigation from the BFRO says, Mr. Ford, the witness, was part of a crew working on telecommunication cable when the sighting occurred. He is quite certain he did not see a bear and that the animal was not a man. He further described the animal as having an all-over dark brown-black color. The arms hung long at its sides. They did not move noticeably when the animal walked. As noted in the report, the hips were wider than the shoulders. The animal's head was not large, but did come to a bit of a point. Due to the glare from the sun, Mr. Ford was unable to make out the face very well. So when something is backlit like that, you're going to see more of a silhouette, and you're not going to see, because the light's not shining on the face, it's coming from behind. So, Mr. Ford estimated the animal was about 60 yards away from him. He watched it walk back and forth between the bushes and the road at least 3 to 4 times. Each time it walked into the road, it would stop and look directly at Mr. Ford, even cocking its head to the right as if trying to figure out what Mr. Ford was. The last time it entered the bushes, Mr. Ford saw the animal's foot as it was walking and noticed the foot was extremely large. Mr. Ford estimates the height of the animal to be over 8 feet tall. The bushes near the road were not as tall as the animal, but were thick and led into the heavy areas of fur. The other members of the crew were working while Mr. Ford was viewing what he described as this animal's display. Mr. Ford stated that the pacing behavior reminded him greatly of an animal pacing in a zoo. Mr. Ford stated that he knew afterwards he had seen something extraordinary and now firmly believes in the existence of Sasquatch. So this is another cool one, and it harkens back, nice little callback to the previous story, the pacing. And this goes to some comments that I've gotten on previous episodes about tree knocks and howls, and how do we know what they're saying? How do we know that we're kind of mimicking them, but what are we saying to them? And he says here, he heard a sound, he mimicked it, and now this creature's kind of looking at him like, what are you saying? Who are you? So I thought that was interesting too. And again, you have this daytime sighting. It's sunny. They're kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's one road in and out. They hear these weird sounds. They mimic them. And a coworker sees a man cross the road. And now this witness is seeing a large, hairy, human-like creature crossing the road. And again, doing that pacing, kind of going this way, stopping, looking, and then kind of coming back, stopping and looking, trying to size them up, sort of contemplating, what is this thing that's on this truck, and making calls. Also interesting, he says he felt it was female. The hips were wider than the shoulders, so that definitely has like that sort of hourglass figure, a woman with wider hips. So I thought that was really interesting. And again, I don't know how true this is, but now firmly believes in the existence of Sasquatch. So you hear a lot of these stories where people just, Bigfoot is not on their radar. They're not into the paranormal. They're not into cryptozoology. They're not into these things. And then they have a sighting, and now they're believers, because seeing is believing. You have an encounter, and you can't just explain it away. This is not a person. Again, why would a guy in a ghillie suit just keep running out back and forth on a road looking at these workers? Very, very weird. But interesting that there was a vocalization. They mimicked it, and now this thing is like, what are you saying? So very interesting to me. Again, animal's not walking with a limp or bent over. To me, it walked straight up and down like a man. So maybe not the patty type where it's hunched over a little bit. This thing is more upright. So again, an interesting observation. So yeah, I love this story too, because again, it harkens back to the pacing of the previous story. So you have these creatures kind of, and he says, like, almost like a display, like it's trying to show its strength, or like an intimidation display, walking back and forth, showing no fear. It's not just running into the woods and hiding. It's coming right out in the open, in the sunshine, in full view of multiple men who are working there, men who could have had guns in the truck or on their person. So very interesting. Not sure what to make of this one, but love this story as well. All right, everybody. So I'm gonna end it there. Those the 6 stories from King County, Washington, near Seattle. So everybody listening in Seattle, thank you so much for being fans. You like double our numbers from New York and anywhere else. New York is second on the list, which did not surprise me, because I am from New York, and like I said, I do a lot of New York City, tri-state area stories, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. But Seattle is number 1. So thank you all guys for listening. And if you enjoyed this one, please let me know in the comments below. There's plenty more from King County, not just Washington State has hundreds of reports, but just King County alone near Seattle, 47 reports. I've done 6 of them today, so we still got, 40, 41 other stories I can relate to you guys. And these stories were cool because some of them you could really sort of maybe try to debunk, not outright debunk, but you could offer up that maybe it was a bear, maybe it was a misidentification. And again, not to say that these people are liars or, I think they saw what they think they saw. I don't think they're lying or hoaxing or trying to pull a fast one here. I think, if they're taking the time to find a website and type it all out and speak to a follow-up investigator, they believe they saw something. So, but the skeptic in me always wants to look for the rational explanation. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. And you have something on all fours at night, crossing a road quickly. I have to look at it possibly being a bear. I'm not saying it was definitely a bear, but there's a possibility. Some other stories where these things are sort of scooping water into their mouths or clearly walking upright, clearly pacing back and forth, looking at these people, no ears, just a round head. It's not a grizzly or a black bear. It's not a bear. It's not a deer. It's not a moose. Like, how do you explain it? It's either a person, a Bigfoot, or this person who's submitting the report has nothing better to do than type out paragraphs of a fake story and then waste their time talking to a follow-up investigator. And I don't know. So take your pick about what you think it is. Again, let me know in the comments below, do you guys have any favorite stories here? Any thoughts on these stories? If you would like to share your story with me, you can come on the show. You can just shoot me an email and I can read it like I'm doing these, jason@oddanduntold.com. And I will get back to you as soon as possible. You can always go to our merch store. I'll put a link for that in the description below as well. And again, question everything. You always have to question things. And I've been talking to a lot of people in the comments on YouTube and elsewhere. And some people get mad that I question things, that I question, a podcaster's story because it doesn't make sense or because there's provably false information. And, I've never called him or anybody a liar. Like I said, I'm very open to these things. But I question them. I have to look at, could it have been this? Could this have been a misidentification? Could the person have been mistaken? Doesn't mean I think someone's lying if I question them. And I will say this again, I have shared many of my own personal stories on here. So has John, so has Josh and Scott, and so many people have just posted their own stories on here and told their own stories on here. And we always keep it open. Like, if you know what we saw, if you can explain this, please let us know. Like, if you're a scientist who deals with Northeast lakes and you can tell us what we saw in this lake, please let us know. Because for us, it's weird, but if there's a reasonable explanation, we want to hear it. We're not going to take it personally. I don't take it personally when people question me, and I don't want other people to take it personally if I question them or, someone else's story that they believe. We're all entitled to our opinions. We're all entitled to our beliefs, but we need to question everything respectfully. So until next week, everybody, again, question everything and rock and roll.